Good afternoon, everyone. We are excited to be here with you today to share our presentation about the mind of a bully and the making of a bully. My name is Asif Masood, and this is Steve Thorpe, and we're both recent graduates from the Wright Graduate University for the Realization of Human Potentials. We actually both got our master's degree. I am a technologist by trade and have been working at the Sears Holdings Corporation where we've actually been doing presentations on social emotional intelligence.
I've been a teacher for most of my career and a therapist and a consultant. And so the issue of bullying has been big in my career.
Last year, we were thinking about, how can we take this work that we've been doing at the corporate level into something more out into the world. And as it happens, I got this email about an anti-bullying summit that was happening in D.C. in December. And we decided to jump at the chance, even though we were terrified about doing that presentation. And, it was something that we prepared for about 2 to 3 months. And, it's something that we're really both proud of and enjoyed doing. And so we thought we would bring it out here into, back into an idea cafe so that we can share it with you guys as well. One thing we do want to point out is that, we're talking about bullying in a one-on-one interaction. We do realize that there's systems that are also in play here, like school systems and, corporate systems, but we're not going to really delve into that too much. We're going to stick with the one-on-one transaction as far as bullying goes. So jumping right in, what is a bully? The Webster Dictionary defines bullying as someone using superior strength and influence to get what they want. So it's a power play at hand where someone tries to take their authority to get you to do what they want you to do. What we want to be clear here is that bullying and assault are two different things. When it becomes physical, it is assault. And what we're going to be talking about today does not really apply. When it's assault, get the authorities involved, and whether it's the police or your boss or parents or whatever, because we don't want this to stop you from we don't want assault to be mistaken for bullying.
Yeah, so we're going to be looking at bullying as a transaction. Now, I can think of a time when I grew up in Dayton, Ohio. I used to live on a farm, and when I turned around 10, we moved from the farm to the suburbs. And I went from dressing, I had pants that didn't quite fit, kind of awkward shirts. And when I came to the suburbs, there was a group of kids that made fun of the way I looked. And my response to that was I started to feel like I didn't belong. I shut down. I withdrew. What I realized was when they were making fun of me, that was actually helping them feel more popular, more powerful in the social group. So we're going to look at bullying. We're going to look at the people who do the bullying, the people who feel bullied, but also the audience, which plays a key role in the dynamics of bullying as we're going to describe it.
Another point that we want to make sure is that we don't condone the actions of a bully. We are seeking to understand the bully. And then there's also this myth that, there's these bullies that are out there and they're separate from us. So we're also looking to change the conversation that bullying are us versus them kind of thing. Like bullies are them and we're not like them. Rather than having that us versus them conversation, we're going to talk about how we can all be a bully, and it's all about us. And so some other misconceptions about bullying is that only some people bully, and that bullies don't have friends, and that bullies are insecure. And the real thing that we want to get across is that we want to change the dynamic of the us versus them, and that there are some other things there's a larger dynamic at play is the best way to say it.
Right. So when parents hear their kids are being bullied, they say things like, oh, that person must be experiencing a lot of pain. They're the most sad person, or they don't have any friends. And the research on bullying shows that bullies actually, when people engage in bullying behavior, they actually in that moment feel very confident. They do it when they have a strong social standing and they assume that they're going to be able to dominate or win in that situation. They also do it usually for the audience, to get the audience really rallied behind them more so than it being about the person who they are doing the bullying with. We find that bullying behavior is part of it's part of natural social hierarchical behavior that we see in animals, we see it in all sorts of mammals. And the mammals that do the bullying, and when others back down to them, they become the alpha and they become more powerful. Bullies tend to lack empathy towards those that are victimized. And this is perhaps the most important part of what we're talking about is the bullying is a transaction. And so if someone is not willing to sort of slip into the role of being a victim, then the bullying isn't really bullying. It doesn't really work. So it requires the victim and the audience in order for them to gain the kind of power they're going for.
So a story to kind of demonstrate that is one from my childhood. I was hanging out with a couple of friends of mine, and my brother walked in, and he was limping. He had hurt his foot a couple days ago, and my friends started making fun of him. And so at that point, I had a choice. Do I go along with my friends, or do I, tend to my brother? And in that moment, I remember choosing to go along with my friends. I wanted to belong with my friends. I wanted my friends to like me. And so this is very important about the bystander role. Especially if the bystanders, first of all, if they don't speak up, then you're actually siding with the bully. And if you do speak up, which side are you going to pick? And, a part of me feels sad that I picked the side of my friends rather than my brother who was being bullied. And it's something that I thought about quite, and went back and talked to my brother about. He doesn't even remember that happened, but it's something that's a part of my life growing up with him, and an example of the bystander role, picking one side or the other. Now we want to jump into kind of how we analyze this transaction between bullying and the victim. And at WGU we talk about 6 core disciplines. And when we were looking at bullying, 3 disciplines really stood out. One was Adler and inferiority complex. Adler talks about when someone is inferior, they try to act superior to hide their inferiority. Another one is developmental, which we'll talk about later. How did the bully or the victim come to be how they are? But the third one is human potential. And the one that we're going to look at today a little bit is called transactional analysis. And the father of transactional analysis is Eric Berne. And he he wrote a book called Games People Play. And in that book, he talks about different transactions and how, people, when they're communicating with one another, how they go into different ego states. And, Steve here is going to talk about the different ego states that people go into.
Okay, so transactional analysis was designed for adults. And what they said is that when you have adults coming together, there's 3 ego states. There's the parent ego state. So if I see Asif and I start telling him what he should eat, what he should wear, how he should talk, I'm going to a superior position to him, and I'm sort of acting like a parent. The adult ego state is, in Eric Berne's language, is a equal one-on-one. So if we're equal and I mutually respect him and expect him to respect me, I'm being the adult. But the child ego state is really going one down. So if I start to tell him how he should be, I'm kind of wanting him to go one down and take my advice. Equally, I could come to Asif and I could become one down. I could start asking him what I should do. I could become insecure. I could sort of act like, I don't know this, you should tell me. All of those can exist. Now, even though this was designed for adults, the same can hold true for parents. Sometimes you have a bossy kid who thinks that they should tell everyone else what to do, and they are like a parent. And when we see a bullying transaction with adults, one person is going into that parent ego state, trying to dominate another. And what they're really trying to do is to get someone else, an equal, to go from an adult ego state to a child ego state.
And this can happen even with children, right?
Absolutely.
A child can try to act like a parent to other children.
Yes, I've seen it many times. Somebody really bossy or someone who's just trying to dominate. And if they could get that other child to sort of let go of the sense that they're equal, go one down, get insecure, and kind of lose themselves, then you have a transaction. So what we're really looking at is how do we move from looking at bullies as a certain type of person and victims as another type of person to look at these as ego states that we can cycle through. I could go to work and my boss could do something and I could feel bullied, and I can all of a sudden go to a child and leave feeling really bad. Then I can go to a coworker and I can try to dominate them and put them in a child ego state. And now I feel a little better, and they may take it out on somebody else. So it's important to understand this is something that happens all the time throughout the day and can happen on a moment-to-moment basis.
And so as it relates to bullying, what we're trying to show is that, a bully will use aggressive behavior in relationship with someone else. And what they're trying to do is take on that parent role. But what's critical here is that you as the victim have the choice to accept that victim role. If you don't accept that child role, that victim role, then the bully cannot bully you. And so that's what we're trying to break, that cycle between the bully and the child.
Exactly. So let's look at the characteristics of the victim role. As a school teacher, I saw children who were chronically always being bullied, and they were actually victims looking for bullies. So someone, if you are in a situation you feel bullied, oftentimes you become submissive, you feel insecure, you leave that sense of entitlement that you deserve respect and that you're important, and put your feelings aside to make room for someone else. And oftentimes there's a sense it's easier to avoid the conflict and just become small than to stand up and have a conflict with someone. So it's a lot about it is ignoring your own feelings to make room for someone else's.
Right. And so there are victims, and then there are also chronic victims. People who tend to find themselves more in that victim role. And this is not about victim blaming, but it's about looking at, if you are 90% of your time in that victim role, then what's leading you to, finding yourself in that role. And some of the characteristics of victims is that they have low self-esteem. They don't feel like they have the right to be respected. They choose victimhood as a way of being. A lot of times they're depressed. A lot of times they're socially isolated. They don't have a whole lot of friends. And this is very important, especially when it comes to cyberbullying, because one thing that we're seeing, at least in the old way, when a victim went home, they had some reprieve from that bully at school, assuming, they're not being bullied at home. But let's, keep that aside for a second. With cyberbullying, with social media, with, Facebook, Instagram, all these things, we're finding that the victims are, the bullies are actually following those victims home. So it's really important to look at, how do you get out of that victim zone, not only at school, but also at home and also on social media.
Yeah, the other thing research tells us about social media is that it's true with children and adults is that people are willing to be far meaner, say harsher things, and to back up others saying harsh things. So it's easy to get this really mean pack mentality over social media because you don't have to face the person or feel their pain or feel their upset. It's very easy to go much further on social media than it would in person.
Right, because they're not getting that empathy for, when you say something mean and you see that kid scrunch their face, there's more of a tendency to feel empathy. But when you can't see that through the screen, they have no way of knowing how much they're hurting someone, and it doesn't create empathy. It doesn't care about caring at all. So jumping into what makes a chronic bully, because there are developmentally, growing up, a kid growing up, there are some things that lend to, someone becoming a bully. And there are really three major things. And one is that, the primary caretaker and the child. There isn't a whole lot of warmth from that primary caretaker to the child. So that kid didn't feel, a whole lot of warmth. There wasn't a whole lot of emotional altitude, between the child and the parent. So there wasn't a whole lot of room to express. And so that increases the chance that child is going to become a bully. Another thing is that, permissiveness of aggressive behavior, from the child to their siblings, to other children, to the parents, to friends. If the parent allows that to happen, then it's going to lend to, that child being more aggressive as they grow up. And the third thing is that use of power assertive methods, like parents hitting their child a lot. Sometimes we discipline our child and that's okay, but when it's constant and consistent on a daily basis, say, or, violent emotional outbursts where the child has no clue as to what they did wrong will lead to that child being more aggressive as they grow up. Violence begets violence. Too little love on one end and too much freedom for that child on the other end are conditions that strongly lead to aggressive reaction patterns in the child.
Yep. So now we're going to talk about how to stay out of the victim zone. The biggest piece of advice is to really work to stay in that adult ego state. So when someone comes at you or you feel bullied or picked on, instead of becoming small, to stand your ground, stay in your power. Oftentimes that is looking at where are we getting hooked, because when we're hooked, oftentimes we might feel insecure about something. But it's also being willing to feel the uncomfortable feelings, to say no, to use our anger to set boundaries, to express hurt, and to get into the discomfortable situation of confronting someone who is bullying us rather than disappearing and making it easy for them. Another piece of this is to stay connected. When you're in a bullying situation and there's an audience, rather than averting eyes, feeling shame, sort of assuming everyone's on the side of the bully, because by withdrawing, you're actually creating that dynamic, is to stay firm and to stay connected to people through eye contact, through your posture. And that actually goes a long way to disarming the power of the bully, because if the bully can't sort of separate you from the whole group, it's hard for them to establish the kind of power that they're sort of using. So we're going to give an example of 2 different approaches to bullying.
All right. Steve, man, you still don't know how to dress well. You haven't learned anything in 30 years.
What do you mean?
That tie doesn't match that jacket or the pants. I mean, it's just
hey, this
poorly
is an
placed,
expensive jacket. What do you mean?
It's expensive.
You don't even have a tie.
Yeah.
Who are you?
Because I look good without a tie. I don't need a tie to look good.
Okay.
So that's one example where Steve got really defensive and he was looking down. He didn't really look at the audience. And so, and because he was defensive, he just actually gave me more data to bully him even more. So now we'll do an 180 degrees of how to use power to kind of block the bully. Gosh, Steve, you haven't learned anything in 30 years. What kind of tie is that? It doesn't even match your suit.
Oh, it doesn't? Wow, I love the way your purple shirt looks and matches that jacket. That's really, maybe you could help me pick a tie out that works a little better.
You like my clothes?
I do. I don't always have a great color sense, and it's true.
Okay. All right. Maybe we should go shopping together.
That'd be great. I'd really appreciate it.
So you can see here where, he didn't get defensive and he didn't compliment me in a way that put himself down. So what it did was it disarmed me, and I had nowhere to go to kind of make fun of him because he was talking about my clothes and he wasn't putting himself down. So that's a way to kind of disarm me as the bully rather than trying to get defensive or even angry as a way to try to get out of it.
Yeah, one of the things people do who feel like they've been bullied is they'll ruminate as to what they should have said. What was the zinger that would have really stuck it to them? But the thing is the more you engage in that, actually you give more power to the bully, and the audience sees the ineffectual attempts to fight back, and it just lowers your power. So just rolling with it is a much better approach.
Right. So the last thing we want to talk about is unfinished business, and this is the unfinished business of the bully and of the child, as they grow up, because bullying doesn't just end, when you go from grammar school or high school. I mean, you can have bullying situations at work, and unfinished business is something that's a term coined by Fitz Perls, and he was another great thinker from the human potential movement of the 60s. And what he talked about is that we all have unfinished business going on inside of us, but where it becomes a hindrance is that when that unfinished business, causes us to be hijacked, causes us to have emotional outbursts, causes us to basically do something that we wouldn't normally do. And, so the unfinished business of the bully is that they lack trust. They think that powering over someone rather than working with someone is how they're going to get stuff done. So their work is to trust power. Their work is to see that, their behavior is actually taking them out of relationship, actually creating more enemies than it is creating friends.
Yes, and the unfinished business of someone who chronically chooses a victim stance is that they don't believe their feelings matter. They believe it's better off to avoid conflict than to really stand up for what they believe in. And oftentimes they end up chronically unhappy. And the reason it's so important is because we can talk about, these strategies to use in moments, but oftentimes our unfinished business, we will choose one role or another, and it takes a little bit more than just one transaction at a time to really work through that. That's why getting a graduate degree in emotional intelligence or getting coaching or an ongoing way to really go deeper into addressing these issues is really important to really stay out of this dynamic.
All right. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.